The basic economic resource, the means of production, quote unquote, to use the economist term, is no longer capital, nor natural resources, nor labor. It will be, and it is, knowledge. This is coming directly from Peter F. Drucker, renowned, outstanding financial director and kind of business, I would say, philanthropist and philosopher, truly, in business. Peter F. Drucker is an absolutely brilliant man. He's an Austrian businessman. And he has this book called Post-Capitalist Society. And it's absolutely interesting how he enters with that. This book really lays out a lot of what this modern academy is about. It is truly a knowledge society. We are living in this new knowledge society, and this is what this post-capitalist society book is about, is transferring from this capitalist, society, essentially the way we've always lived, into a knowledge society where knowledge is the power, and basically cutting out the bullshit and focusing on the actual value of things is going to be what drives us. And although there still will be capitalism, this will put us into a true knowledge economy. And he lays that out. Those basic economic resources, the means of production, are no longer land, labor, and capital as they still teach in colleges, where you're paying $50,000 a year and you're learning land, labor, capital. That's not what you want to learn. He actually just destroys that whole form of thinking and goes, it will and is knowledge. And although land, labor, and capital are fundamentals, it's important to adapt those into modern times. So land, labor, and capital. Land is basically, it's what you have. It's the foundation. So it's the skills, the connections, the capital you currently have, all those things, and it mixes in with capital because obviously that's the cash resources. And land, labor is your time and energy, plus if you can recruit more people, their time and energy. So hiring, having a team. And then capital is that one that encompasses all of them. And he says it will and is be knowledge. These central wealth creating activities will be neither the allocation of capital to productive uses nor labor. The two poles of the 19th and 20th century economic theory, whether classical, Marxist, Keynesian, or neoclassical, value is now created by productivity and innovation. Both applications of knowledge to work. The leading social groups of the knowledge society will be knowledge workers, knowledge executives who know how to allocate knowledge to productive use. Just as the capitalists knew how to allocate capital to productive use, knowledge professionals, knowledge employees, practically all these knowledge people will be employed in organizations. Yet, unlike the employees under capitalism, they will own both of the means of productions and the tools of production. The former through their pension funds, which are rapidly emerging in all developed countries as the only real owners. The latter because knowledge workers will own their knowledge and can take it with them where they go. This is very interesting. It's actually something that Andrew Yang talked a little bit about in his running for the presidency. He was kind of the person that foresaw this stimulus package we're getting now during this coronavirus epidemic. While people are in quarantine, if you're listening to this down the road, this is that time in history that people are looking back at during the quarantine time, and that's why I've been doing these quarantine side chats. But back to the point here is Andrew Yang kind of foresaw this. He said there will be a time in the not too near future, and it ended up being a lot sooner than a lot of people thought. He said there will be a time in the near future where we will need Americans receiving paychecks. Americans will be out of work, whether that's AI, whether that's an epidemic, really anything that sets masses amount of people out of work. And he wanted to have that conversation of, what are the logistics of this? Let's get a framework in place. And now it's looking like this is not only has it happened, but how quickly it can happen and how, unprepared our system is. So he was proposing this kind of change. And, part of that, the way it relates to what Peter Drucker was saying here is, Peter Drucker says the knowledge workers own their knowledge and can take it with them wherever they go. And that's why knowledge is so powerful, is this knowledge that we have, this, what we put out online, like this basically, it's a digital asset, so it's something you can't touch. You take it with you wherever you go. If back in the day you owned a business that was you raised pigs, you're a pig farmer or a sheep farmer, and that's your pure business. Let's say you move halfway across the world randomly, or you're displaced and you don't have any of your material possessions. All you have is like a smartphone. You can't take that business with you. But nowadays with, things like YouTube, things like social media, things like all this online, really abundant space created in this world, it's so insane to think about. Before this, think about how much less data there was. There really wasn't anything. It's really fascinating when you think about it, because we have the same land mass before the internet, but then once the internet begins, this increasing mass of bank of knowledge and information, because we truly have transferred into this age where, people will pay upwards of six figures for something that you can't physically touch, something that's just purely online. And understanding this, that, knowledge workers own their knowledge and take it with them wherever they go. Back to what Andrew Yang was saying, is part of this $1,000 a month, he basically called it, I think it was like the freedom dividend or something like that, which is like $1,000 a month to every American. And that's like people, I think it's like if you're 18 and older and not in the retirement age. And if you're already receiving money from the government, that would cancel this out. Basically, you would subtract that from the 1,000 and whatever's left you receive. It basically can't go over that 1,000 for the freedom dividend. And part of what he said would fuel it, which I found very interesting, is this data. Because your data, just by logging into Facebook, logging into Instagram, logging into YouTube and Google, all the data they have collected, all the different points of, interests, what do you click on? What are your normal habits? All this data they collect, everything's tracked. And it's all in this incredible algorithm that has trillions and trillions of data points. And this essentially gives any company the ability to sell this data, which is, again, it's something that you can't physically touch, but you can, sell it at absolutely no overhead. So you can have all this data, essentially no overhead. Obviously, they have the cost of building this technology, but once it's running is what I'm saying. And so basically, it's infinitely scalable. So something like that, where they could sell all this data, Andrew Yang is proposing, since we're living in this knowledge society, is taking some of that data and going, okay, you're responsible for generating this. So it's kind of like a solar panel, if you think about it in that way. The sun hits a solar panel naturally, or the sun hits a windmill, and the windmill generates energy, kinetic energy in that way. And it's essentially like we're kind of powering these giant companies. If Facebook or Amazon, like if all the users went, okay, we're just going to stop buying from you for a month, they'd go out of business. But it's fascinating, because if we could all essentially get paid in proportion to this sort of energy we're creating, maybe not all of what we're paid, but a little bit of it would add to this freedom dividend. And that's a fair way of, balancing out the wealth a little bit more, having that trickle down, because there's these giant digital, the wealthiest people in the world right now, Mark Zuckerberg, what's his name? Sorry, Jeff Bezos. His book's absolutely incredible, the Everything Store, and essentially tapping into their wealth, having this trickle down into this, freedom dividend that Andrew Yang had laid out. And now, obviously, it's these stimulus checks, but that's just how he saw it. And circling back to this post-capitalist society, understanding that the economic challenge of the post-capitalist society is therefore be the productivity of knowledge work and of knowledge worker. The social challenge of a post-capitalist society will, however, be the dignity of the second class in post-capitalist society, the service workers. Service workers, as a rule, lack the necessary education to be knowledge workers. And in every country, even the most highly and advanced one, they will constitute a majority. The post-capitalist society will be divided into new dichotomy of values of aesthetic perceptions. Aesthetic perceptions. It will be not the two cultures, literary and scientific, of which the English novelist, scientist, and government administrator C.P. Snow wrote in his The Two Cultures of of the scientific revolution in 1959. Through that, split is real enough. The dichotomy between intellectuals and managers, so knowledge workers and service workers, and remember, as we discussed, the social challenge will be, how the dignity of this second class, these service workers, and again, I'm not calling them that. That's just how he describes it in this book. It's not like, oh, you're a service worker, you don't deserve this. No. He's just kind of explaining that in this new knowledge society where the basic economic resource, the means of production, is knowledge, not land, labor, and capital, these are the things that we'll have to focus on. So the social challenge, again, is to focus on the dignity of that second-class worker because it will become disproportionate over time. And the dichotomy between the intellectuals and the managers, the former concerned with the words and ideas, in the new syntheses will be a central philosophical and educational challenge for the post-capitalist society. So he gets really in depth, with outflanking the nation state, some history, and I won't bore you with that. The whole thing we do here at the Modern Academy is, since I read a book a day, and I'm in a bunch of high-level courses along with being mentored by millionaires, top people of industry, and constantly basically absorbing new information, listening to brilliant people, and trying to extract lessons out of it. I basically distill and sum this knowledge that I accumulate here on the Modern Academy podcast. And we usually do 3 episodes a day, 1 5, 1 10, and 1 15-minute episode. And, we're back to normal schedule now. We had a little bit of a gap where we were just doing 1 a day, and now we're back to our 3. So, kind of continuing on with this introduction to the post-capitalist society, which we'll be talking a lot more about here at the Modern Academy. So if you enjoy this, I highly recommend you pick up the book and follow along. Again, I'll go over basically the main points that I learned from this book, the summaries, and the lessons extracted. So still, self-redemption, self-renewal, spiritual growth, goodness, and virtue, the new man, to use the traditional term, are likely to be seen again as existential rather than social goals or political prescriptions. The end of the belief in salvation by society surely marks an inward turning. It makes possible renewed emphasis on the individual, the person. It may even lead, at least we hope so, to a return in the individual responsibility. And that's what we've lost, is this individual responsibility. People blame the government for things. People blame others. This sense of individual responsibility that's so vital just for human nature in general is personal responsibility. People drop the ball with this. That's why I really like people like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, because underlying their ideas, their thoughts, there's this sense of responsibility. And it's when people lose touch with that sense of responsibility that they get thrown out of whack. It's when they lose the perceptions, the perspective. And that's really, why I love Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan is and so many others, Eric Weinstein, tons of great intellectuals. And realizing that these frameworks, these rules, these responsibilities laid upon us are freaking important. People pass over and go, they get caught up in just frivolous things, things that occupy the mind and take up people's times. But when you can focus on, okay, let me get to my responsibilities, let me get to these things in perspective. If you can have this kind of paradigm that I'm really trying to download and realize is there's been all of this history. Your ancestors, the generations before you, have fought their asses off. Think about how many people it took to get you here in this moment. So every single thing in history has led up to this moment. Are you happy with yourself? And again, it's so important to realize that this is the sense of, it's important to have balanced optimism, but this is the sense of, light a little fire under your ass. Get yourself going. Have this paradigm, and we'll be discussing this more because I'm really trying to download this because I struggle with it as well. When it comes to routine, when it comes to maintenance, and we talked about this in the previous episode of today's April 23rd of the quarantine side chat. You can listen to that if you'd like. That's called Eliminating the Victim Mentality, and that's quarantine side chats. So I think that's where we'll end it today. I got a little passionate there at the end, but personal responsibility, holding yourself up, and getting back to that as a culture by entering this knowledge society and this post-capitalist society. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and subscribe. And until next time.